Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this virtual roundtable, SMEs, A Road to Recovery. It is jointly hosted by ACCA and SMEDA. And we are very, very thankful to our colleagues around the world. We have been joined by Alexandra Zarina, as well as Asad Hamid from Islamabad and Arif Mirza from Lahore. We also have our friends from SMEDA. As you can see their faces on the screen, we have Fahim Piracha from Hyphen Consulting and Farhan Zafar from SMEDA. So without further ado, I'll hand over microphone to Asad Hamid Khan, who's the Head of Business Development Markets at ACCA, who's joining us from our Islamabad office. So hello, Asad, can you hear me? Can we do a little mic check?
Yes, Rashid, can you hear me and see me?
Very loud and very pleasant to see you. So Alexandra, if you can please move the slide and we'll hand it over to Asad. Please start, Asad.
Yes, thank you much, Rashid. Very good afternoon to everyone. And Alexandra, I believe it's good morning at your end. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out to join us for this very critical conversation. As we are all aware that SMEs continue to serve as the bedrock for any economy. So today's conversation would be more around a collaboration between SMEDA and ACCA, where we'll have a detailed conversation in terms of how COVID-19 recovery is being envisaged within the SME sector. This is something that our partners, SMEDA, would pick up. And then from ACCA's end, SMPs, the small and medium practices, they continue to be the chief service providers to the SME sector. So how they have found to be supporting the SME sector. So just to give you a brief outline in terms of ACCA Global. So ACCA continues to be a global body. We have for about 115 plus years. Within a wide range of stakeholders, we continue to service among top corporates, also the SME sector, which is reliant on the finance and accounting talent, which is going to play an important role in terms of SME's contribution to not just the national economy or the economy where they exist, but to the other sectors that they're serving outside their respective geographies. So just to take you into further detail in terms of how ACCA has been realigning its working and operations since COVID-19. It has been very tough times. It continues to be uncertain. There was a period when most of the countries and the geographical proximities were under lockdown. Now the lockdown element has opened up. Unfortunately, there has been a major impact in terms of the loss of life, the loss of economic momentum, the loss of the overall consumer, the consumption. But what we have seen is that this is not a disruption that has happened for the first time. So if you take out the pandemic from the equation, you would realize that historically the economic and business models have undergone major changes, which we may call as disruption. Before electricity, before the first industrial revolution came into place. So we all know that we are undergoing the fourth industrial revolution, which has now been coupled with the impact of pandemic. What it has done is, despite all the challenges, it has brought this opportunity where we see businesses not just within the respective economies, but globally collaborating with a wider use of technology, with a wider use of digital transformation. There is a greater embracing of this new change. What this has brought further is how businesses traditionally were used to working. That is something which is reshaping as well. So I'm sure that in today's conversation, when we will have SMEDA sharing their survey findings, that will be followed by ACCA survey findings in terms of SMPs or supporting the SMEs. So how we can collectively work in our respective domains and contribute to rebuilding SMEs within the Pakistan's landscape, not just from a short-term recovery perspective, but a long-term prosperity and jobs. Last but not the least, I think an area which needs to be picked up and will be picked up by the worthy panelists as well as the presenters is that how we can really take up technology as a whole and equate that and connect that with the startup and incubation ecosystem that can really multiply the impact of the SMEs. So this is an area that is very close to ACCA's global agenda. We believe that there is innovation at the heart of everything that ACCA does, and the wider economic paradigm that has resulted in view of the pandemic. So best of luck to all the participants, and I hope that as an audience you have a fantastic time today in terms of really taking away how SMEs can contribute to the larger economic prosperity and really accelerate the inclusive, innovative, the economic growth that we in Pakistan are positioned at right now. So thank you much once again, and best of luck to my fellow panelists and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Asad.
very much, Asad. All right, so moving on, we have our next presenter, Alexandra Zorina, who is joining us. So is it your turn, Alexandra?
I think it's my turn.
No, I think it's Farhan who
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
presenting.
Okay,
Mhm.
so Farhan is the policy and planning expert from SMEDA, and the topic of his presentation is based on a survey report, impact of COVID-19 on SMEs, and there are a lot of insights waiting for us. So without further ado, handing over to Farhan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Farhan Zafar, and I'm associated with the Policy and Planning Division of Small and Medium Enterprises Development Authority. I would like to thank ACCA for organizing this virtual roundtable on a very important subject. All of us know that SMEs play a vital role in the development of a country. So the case is similar in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, SMEs constitute more than 95% of all enterprises, employing around 72% of non-agricultural labor force, and their contribution in Pakistan's GDP is 40%. According to the last census of economic establishments that was published in 2005, there were 3.2 million enterprises in Pakistan. So according to our estimates, through extrapolation, we have estimated that currently there are 5.2 million enterprises in Pakistan now. So before moving on to my presentation, I would just like to add a little bit about my organization, SMEDA. So SMEDA is working under the umbrella of Ministry of Industries and Production and is the sole facilitator of SMEs under the federal government of Pakistan. So we work at three levels, basically. Firstly, at the macro level, we provide policy support to the government. And then we are directly involved in SME policy making and supporting creation of a conducive and enabling regulatory environment. Secondly, at the meso level, SMEDA is involved in development of common facility centers and industrial clusters through its public sector development program. And then lastly, at the micro level, we are involved in providing hand-holding support to SMEs and also providing business development services in all areas of business management. So coming to my presentation, as we all know that COVID-19 pandemic has been a major concern for developed as well as developing world. So Pakistan was also facing the brunt of COVID-19 during April and May. It was at the peak in April. So SMEDA conducted a survey to assess the impact of COVID-19 on small and medium enterprises. Our survey specifically aimed to gauge the impact of this pandemic on small and medium-sized businesses. So in our survey, 920 businesses participated, and there was participation from around 67 cities across Pakistan. So, since this survey was conducted online, at that time we had to hurry and we had to publish our results. So there is a 3% margin of error in our survey findings. So these are, in this slide, you can see some of our key findings here. Uh, as you can see that around 95% of enterprises reported a reduction in their operations. Then there was 23% reporting up to 100% loss in their export orders. 92% reported that they have experienced a reduction in their supply chain. 48% reported that they have laid off some of their employees. However, the major concern that has been throughout this COVID-19 pandemic was that 89% of them were reporting major financial issues. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So, yeah, okay, fine. As you can see in the slide that 34% of our respondents in the survey were selling up to 100% of their products locally within their own city, followed by only 6.5% who were selling their product or service nationally, and then very few of them were exporting up to 100% of their product or service internationally. Next slide, please. I think there's some error. I'm seeing a different slide here.
Really? So the slide national level operations and export affected, is it the slide that you're seeing on the screen now?
Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, this one. Oh.
Is it, could someone please confirm that everyone is seeing the same slide?
Operations affected due to COVID-19 and lockdown. No, the previous one, I think.
So on my end, Alexandra, the slide visible is national level operations and export affected by employment.
Can you please go to the previous slide?
Yes, of course, sure. So do you see the right slide now?
Not at the moment. Still the same slide.
No, it has changed. Yeah, it has changed on my end. It's
now it's fine. Thank you. So we have already discussed this in our key findings slide. So while 95% enterprises reported that their production and work activity is suffering due to COVID, 51% of them reported that COVID-19 has affected 100% of their operations. Next slide, please.
Do you see the slide changing? It's national level operations and exports affected now on the screen.
No, I can't.
No.
Yeah, I think there's a little lag just for our audiences. Please bear with us.
Yeah, we are really sorry, but it's taking some time to go to the next slide. So, okay, now I can see it. So analysis of the data showed us that smaller enterprises were suffering more due to COVID-19, while larger enterprises were suffering more in terms of exports, as you can see from the slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay.
Supply chain disruptions, right?
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Um,
Thank you. So enterprises in this case were asked to rate their level of supply chain disruption, and around 46% of small and medium enterprises reported that they were facing the maximum level of supply chain disruption. Only around 2.4% reported the lowest level of supply chain disruption. Next slide, please. Maybe from the next slide, you can click it a little bit earlier, so the lag,
I just need to know when to click.
yeah, okay. So in the slide again, analysis of the data showed that the smaller sized enterprises were facing higher level of supply chain disruption. Next slide. Okay. So COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent lockdown made the situation considerably difficult for people who were being laid off at that time. So the situation was even worse for people working on daily wages. And at that time, the government was considering to design some programs for them. So as per our data, uh, slide, uh, next slide.
Next. So future expectations of
No,
enterprise.
the previous one.
The previous
Uh,
one,
uh, I have
employees laid
to.
off.
I was, yeah. The previous one.
Daily wagers employed.
Yeah, this one. Okay, so according to our data, 63% of enterprises had daily wages working for them, with larger enterprises obviously employing more daily wages. Next slide, please. So in this case, our goal was to see how many people working on daily wages and otherwise were laid off, and when would the enterprises be in a position to rehire them. So one positive side of this finding was that around 60% of the enterprises, as you can see from the slide, were planning to rehire their employees in 1, 2, or 3 months. Next slide, please. So regarding the expectation of enterprises, majority of businesses, around 60%, reported that they would continue with their present line of business. An important question at this time, at that time, was that whether these enterprises would be able to sustain the lockdown. And it was surprising that 33% of businesses reported that they would only be able to sustain lockdown for a couple of weeks, not more than that. Next slide, please. So during COVID-19 peak and the subsequent lockdown, 73% of businesses reported that they have completely halted their operations, and they were not in a position to further continue their operations. Next slide. Okay, so we gave the enterprises a chance to report multiple issues that they were facing at that time, and around 89% reported financial issues. And then that was followed by 60% reporting issues in selling their products, and 43% reporting issues in supply chain, and then marketing, transportation, labor, and so on. Next slide, please. So other than that, there were 82% of enterprises were demanding that government should introduce a support package for small and medium enterprises. 33% wanted a reduction in the duration of lockdown, and then 31% wanted the government to allow businesses to operate during lockdown. Next slide, please. So in terms of specific support measures, SMEs have demanded interventions from government to mitigate the economic impact of coronavirus on small businesses, which included like financial assistance packages, tax relief, support in paying salaries, relaxation in payment of utility bills, easing conditions for loan payment. So these survey findings were then finally shared with our government. And on the basis of this survey, the government designed an electricity support package for small commercial and industrial consumers across Pakistan, including the province of Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir. So the funding package was part of the Ministry of Industries and Production SME relief package, which was a $110 billion package for SMEs. So in the support package, commercial consumers of electricity connections were eligible with up to 5 kilowatts for commercial and up to 7 kilowatts for industrial connection. And then in May, June, their electricity bills were loaded with an amount equivalent to 3 months of electricity bills. So they had an option to pay through that credited amount in their electricity bill up to a maximum of 100,000 Pakistani rupees in case of commercial connections and 450,000 Pak rupees for industrial connections. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farhan.
Thank you, Farhan.
Yeah, sorry, is there? So if I may start, then was my presentation, or is it going to? All right. Thank you. I apologize.
Yes, please.
Yes. Apologies once again for the technical issues. It's just, I think there was a slight lag of connection because I was changing the slides from here from the UK, and most probably there is there is a time lag. So apologies, Farhan, but I was trying to do my best to support you with that. Yeah. So if you don't mind, I would then go to my part of the presentations. So my name is Alexandra. I work for the ACCA Professional Insights team, and my particular focus within the Professional Insights is small and medium-sized businesses. And well, of course, within our work, we both run surveys, but we also look at how the accountancy profession can be instrumental in this particular moment in COVID-19, and how the accountants and finance professionals can actually support the small business sector. And well, today in my agenda, just continuing to what Farhan started, I'll just show you a very short snapshot of our own COVID-19 research that we run for our members globally and the SME focus. Then we'll look at the role of the SMP, small and medium-sized practices, and how important they are in general circumstances supporting small businesses, but what was also their specific COVID-19 emergency response. And also I'll take the opportunity to look at the broader role of the SMP, small and medium-sized practitioners, and how they're actually having a broader role of super connectors of local communities, local economies, and how important they are in ensuring the economic recovery. And finally, I also prepared some slides with the links to those of the attendants of the seminar of the roundtable who are within the small business sector, small practice sector, on on the materials that we prepared to support you, and you will have this presentation with you after we finish the roundtable, so you'll be able to take a look at those materials more in detail. I won't be entering into detail there. So just to echo what Farhan mentioned in his presentation, so also other data cut for Pakistan shows that the SMEs are heavily impacted in very important and key business areas by COVID-19. So the supply chains are disrupted, the cash flow problems are very visible, the employee productivity is tremendously negatively affected. There are impacts across the entire strategic operational indicators, and undoubtedly there is a need for collective action to support the SMEs in their recovery and in a way in their survival at the moment. So from our perspective, as we are very closely working with our members, the COVID-19 was the moment for us to turn and work more actively with the small business sector, both SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, but also the practitioners. And stepping back, historically, we always knew that the SMPs are the vital component supporting the small and medium-sized businesses. And actually, if we think about the impact of that support, if we think that, as Farhan also mentioned in his presentation, 90% of businesses in Pakistan are small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, and the footprint of the small and medium-sized businesses is the same across the world, across different countries. And SMPs, practitioners, have always traditionally been the assurance providers, the advocates, and also the trusted advisors of the small and medium-sized businesses. And this is a key, this is a very important role. And thanks to digitalization, and we all know that more and more practices are going on cloud and using the digital technologies, the nature of the small and medium-sized practices and their work is changing, as well as their relationship with small businesses. Small practices are going way beyond the usual assurance work, the usual compliance work, and they're having, in normal times and non-disrupted times as those ones, more in-depth discussions with clients, helping them to reimagine and transform their businesses. And we have actually seen how this role crystallized even more during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we could hear across different markets, across different countries, how the SMPs were frequently called the emergency services for the small businesses. And well, let's maybe look at more closer at what the emergency service type of assistance looked like. Well, of course, primarily those was the assistance with the cash flow management, and we saw how many of the small businesses are affected. So advising on cash flow management was the primary, let's say, starting point. Then, as we've always heard from the first presentation, across different markets, a number of support schemes were made available to the small businesses. But as usual, those support schemes, sometimes they required further clarification for the small businesses. Sometimes depending on the legal form, sometimes depending on the industry where they're working. The accountants were able, and the small practitioners were able to help small businesses navigate through all the opportunities that were there available, understand what's the right opportunity for them, what's the right scheme or program available there, and then, of course, preparing all the documents. In some countries, I know that, for example, the government support schemes were provided based on the comparative indicators to the revenue in the previous year. So the small businesses, to ensure that they get the funds, they get the support, they needed to prepare all the necessary comparative indicators in a very short time. So accountants were really working around the clock to make sure they can provide all the necessary assistance, navigating and finding the right solutions, but also getting ready for the application processes that sometimes were not too transparent and sometimes were quite difficult to navigate through. Business continuity and resumption planning was another area that's very often quoted by the practitioners, regardless of the geography and the type of businesses they're working with. First of all, for example, our COVID-19 survey results have shown that only 20% of the respondents of our survey from the small business sector ever had any business continuity plan in place. So the small and medium-sized practitioners were working to support their small business clients in putting in place such business continuity plans. But very importantly, at this moment, when we were all facing lockdowns and restrictions, was the resumption planning. And here, a lot of practitioners were just sitting together with their small business practices and just building the plans on how they're going to go back to their businesses when the lockdowns are eased or when the restrictions are eased. They were helping to reimagine the way the businesses would be working in the social distance manner with the new regulations that were imposed. It's basically just building the plans, looking at the premises of the small businesses. Some of the practitioners were just going on the ground, going to the offices, trying to think how to better plan the office space, the retail space, to ensure that all of those health and safety related issues were in place by their clients. And of course, the key area there in also resuming and planning the business after the lockdowns, after the restriction, key area for that was digitalization and apps. A lot of businesses had to stop their operations for some weeks or months. And practitioners were helping them with some vital components to just keep the businesses afloat. In some of the cases, it was using the apps, using the remote payment systems, just some very basic use of the tools to communicate remotely, such as Zoom or other communication tools with the businesses with the clients of the small businesses. For example, there was a tremendous help by the practitioners to the educational sector and to small entities within the educational sector who had to basically overnight, over several days, switch their activities to fully digital. They need to realize the full potential of the applications, not only for communicating, but also to enable the interaction within the groups. So as the practitioners were quite aware of the way how those tools work, because they have already been working remotely with a number of clients. For them, it was also a moment to share this experience with their clients, to make them help their business continue going, even if it's partly. Just depending on the scale of the businesses, because some of the practitioners are working with micro businesses, with like sole enterprises. They were just helping to set up, for example, Instagram accounts. And even when some of those small business services were forced to stop their operations, they were still keeping the contact with the clients, just reminding about their existence to ensure that when the businesses need to resume, they haven't lost their client base. So starting with some very basic social media and communications tools, up to very complex digital apps that would enable the communication with the clients, remote payments, and also even integrating the apps that could facilitate the logistics in the unprecedented times. All this type of assistance can and was provided by a number of practitioners who were really there as the trusted advisors, but also as the emergency help. It was also the moment to reimagine the businesses in a way, and we saw a number of practitioners just sitting together with their clients and looking at how they're going to go forward, which type of business needs to stay permanently remote, which type of business still is viable to continue as normal, previously pre-pandemic times. We can see quite a big number of small businesses who were not owning their own premises, just giving away their premises. And again, the accountants, small practitioners were sitting together with their clients and looking how financially viable it is to continue renting, or how, if the premises were in the ownership of the small businesses, how they can use them more efficiently, also rethinking the type of services they can provide. And in a way, the accountants were also acting as super connectors, because as we know, quite often small accountancy practice is servicing dozens of firms. So it was also the moment when the practitioners and the accountants were acting as the connectors within the community and within the small business community, connecting their clients, for example, for transport and logistics sector, to the ones who were usually doing retail in a traditional manner, to enable the delivery of goods home while the lockdown and restrictions were in place, and we're still seeing then those restrictions coming back in a number of countries. And of course, if we look more holistically, it's the virtual CFO role. And there is a growing number of organizations that are needing the advice of the strategic role of virtual CFO, while it's not economically viable to have one in-house. So some of the practitioners are acting as virtual CFOs, having the strategic role within the number of small businesses. And of course, again, getting back to digitalization, the fact that a lot of practices are digital enabled the analysis of the data, and also facilitated the decision-making, the strategic decision-making by the small practitioners, of course, together with their practices acting as, with their clients acting as virtual CFOs. And well, as it was mentioned already in the first presentation, of course, the access to finance is a major issue for the small businesses now. And traditionally, the SMPs were the ones who were fostering SME financial inclusion, and they're still being so, and still working very closely with the small businesses on that important issue, because as we know, lack of access to finance is one of the major constraints on small business growth. But nowadays we see that it's not the matter of growth, it's actually the matter of survival. So in terms of access to finance, it's advising on the best sources of finance, be it the traditional banks and loans and some government supported schemes, or being it some new support models such as access to acceleration programs. And I know that they are being actively used in Pakistan. Of course, there is an access to mobile payment system, digital payment system, but also insurance that very often was crucial, and actually dealing with the insurance was another, and insurance providers was another very important area where the SMPs were very strongly supporting the SMEs during the lockdown and at the situations where businesses needed to get the compensation from that sector. And as I already mentioned before, the SMPs, in a way, they can see it as a super connector within the community. Apart from the role, the very important role of supporting the small businesses, they are also supporting, in a way, the entire ecosystem around the community, supporting charities and NGOs, driving ethics and sustainability, supporting the financial literacy overall within the communities. And for example, we permanently talk to the SMP, to the practitioners, and some of them are organizing some grassroots financial literacy clinics, for example, for non-official traders at the markets, to teach them on the basic financial literacy, on the basic aspects of cash flow management. That's also the first step for them, in a way, to go out from the gray economy, and the first step to the financial inclusion, and also a way of getting the support from the government at a longer term perspective. And of course, as I was mentioning already, the SMPs were also instrumental in supporting the entire group of the non-governmental organizations and charities that were also very much hit by the pandemic, helping them as well as the small businesses transition some of their operations to the digital format, also acting as assurance providers and providing the links between the charities and NGOs and the small business sector that sometimes is vital and beneficial for both NGOs, charities, but also for the businesses, for example, because as more and more small businesses acknowledge, it's very important both to the clients to see that you're doing something in addition to your business, that you are caring about the community, that you are caring about the sustainability of your businesses, but it's also a vital component for attracting the talent in the future, because more and more millennials, Gen Zs are speaking about the importance of the purposeful careers, and this component does need to be forgotten either within the small business sector or within the small practice sector, because this is the future. This is how you are going to present yourself to the future candidates. And well, in terms of key messages from my short presentation, I would say there are three of them. First of all, we should not forget and we should not lose the sight of the SMP, small and medium-sized practitioners, having access to the SME data, and they're instrumental in identifying what the needs of the small businesses are, and also they're able to articulate them to the governments and NGOs. So the first message is that there should be a dialogue between the SMP sector representatives, NGOs and governments in building the support schemes, because the SMPs are the ones who know the small business nature from inside, and they have all the robust data in their hands enabled by digitalization. Secondly, very important factor is that this role, this support role of the SMPs, it spreads very much beyond the small businesses. It goes to the charities, it goes to the NGOs, to those very important components of the society that should not be missed either. And given this very important and very broad footprint that the SMPs have, they should also be subject to the support schemes from the government, because I know that because of their legal form in some of the markets, they're not really getting the support. So this is a critical moment to turn attention to them and also support them, because sometimes they are facing difficulties not getting the payments timely from the small businesses while having this important role. So they need support, they need to be heard, and they need to be consulted. And just concluding my presentation, I also prepared a selection of material that we as an organization put together in order to support small businesses and small practitioners. All of you will have access to those slides, and you have the links to those that you will be able to access after the presentation. It's just to inform you that I'm sure you already know we have the COVID-19 hub where we group all the publications and articles related to business support and COVID-19 and responding to business support. I would particularly invite, if you are looking for the continuity and recovery resources, to visit this continuity and recovery section of the hub. In addition to that, we also are issuing a quarterly, and now even a bit often than quarterly, a global SMP e-zine, an electronic magazine that's targeting small and medium-sized practitioners. So we were devoting the last several issues of that to managing through COVID-19, transforming your practice in order to be more efficient in supporting the small businesses. And finally, we are now issuing the next SMP Global e-zine issue in the end of this week, and it will be focused on sustainable recovery, which is a very important aspect for both practitioners, but also it's important to bring that message and assistance to the small business sector. In addition to that, specifically for the SMPs, we have put together a selection of videos, podcasts, articles, and informative material on the digital transformation, because we do understand that digital transformation and use of the digital technology by the practices is key at the moment, both for the practices but also for the most efficient help to the small businesses. So you can find this material following the link. When you open the presentation, you can find a breadth and wealth of both practitioner created material, but also ACCA created material. And in addition to that, to those practitioners who would like to support and get the grounding in the business continuity planning for the SME clients, we've also recorded a very interesting and informative, a very hands-on webinar with a specialist in business continuity with the small businesses that you are also welcome to listen to when you have time, to make sure that you are using all the tools and all the energy that you help in supporting your small business communities. In addition to the material that we have there permanently, we've recently run a virtual conference, and one of those sessions in the virtual conference was about S&P transformation and lessons learned from COVID-19. So again, warmly welcome to take a look and listen to that conference. And as usual, we have our ACCA Professional Insights website. And on the screen here, I put some of the recent reports covering the SME and S&P field. And you can find answers to many of your questions looking at those reports. But of course, also, if you have other questions, if you would like to participate in our research, or you would like to discuss any of the issues that I was mentioning in my presentation, you also will find my email address, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or comments. Thanks. I think that's it from my part.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I hope you guys can hear me. So we still have a few minutes before our next session, which is the panel discussion, and we'll be waiting for 2 more panelists. So in the meantime, I would encourage the audience to ask questions. So you have your chat box, you can just type in and ask any question related to the presentation that Alexandra or Farhan presented.
So let me just step in there and ask Alexander, in terms of Alex, your European experience at the moment, which SMEs are you seeing recover the fastest so far?
Oh, that's thank you, Arif, for your question. That's a very difficult one, because you know, regardless of the amount of support schemes that we have, quite a big share of SMEs are still struggling. But I would definitely say that the sectors within the SME that are recovering fastest are the ones who have the strongest digital core, the ones who have the strongest and who also managed, even if some of them are really showing some impressive results of transforming and integrating those digital components in their businesses, like fast tracking the plans that were there for 3 years. So I would say the ones who managed to transition fastest, the ones who managed to start interacting with their customers remotely, the ones who started for example, providing some of the services remotely. Of course, it's possible depending on the type of businesses, but also I would say that the ones who actually managed to come up with some innovative solutions to respond to the current demand of the pandemic. For example, we could see that quite a lot of the textile industries, and I would say that it goes beyond the European experience. It's very much present in Southeastern Asia, for example, who managed to quickly transform their production to the personal protective equipment, face masks, for example, or same about biotech. Some of the solutions that were used for absolutely different areas all of a sudden had some really bright ideas on how they could support the medical sector, also the like everything that's around the healthcare sector, I would say. And actually also interestingly, a very, very flourishing sector, and I would say that again, it goes beyond the European borders, is the education, because from one perspective, it was hit hard by the by all the lockdowns and restrictions of the students to be present in schools and traditional schools, but at the same time we could see a big number of emerging small businesses providing remote education, and not only just face-to-face Skype or Zoom sessions, but really some very elaborated solutions that have participatory components there. And that's also, it's even in starting from the very early stages, and we could see, for example, some very interesting startups that are addressing the like children from the age of 3 or 4, which we could see was one of the biggest difficulties, because with all the kindergartens and schools being closed and parents still needing to keep working the way they would be, but at home with their young children, that was a very, very demanded, let's say, area, and there were quite some interesting innovative solutions there.
Yeah, so we have one question from Mohammed Farhan, and he says, how can we get access to SME data, financial and non-financial, in developing economies for credit risk modeling? Credit risk scoring is vital for immediate approval of credit to SMEs and MSMEs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very good question. Credit scoring. I know that. Do you mean? Do we have this? Do we have more detail of the question? Do you mean like credit scoring so that how can the banks get the access to that, or is it more like how can the SMEs get the assistance in the credit scoring as fast as possible? From whose perspective is that question?
Farhan, if you can give some more details there, but I'm assuming that it's related to SMEs getting credit from the bank.
Yeah, well, it's indeed, that's a very big question, and I know that there is a difficulty still, and it was so pre-COVID for the small businesses to get access to the loans, to the bank loans. I know that a number of countries, again, apart that exceeding, I know that, for example, in Malaysia, they did a fast track access to the small businesses finance program, and it's supported by the government and it's backed by the government guarantees. So I know that some of the governments went and did those unprecedented measures to remove the burdens that were there in place for years to support the SMEs access to the traditional finance, to banking. But I would also say that there is a growing trend of peer-to-peer lending for the small businesses and the small businesses among the small businesses, and also there is a growing number, despite the fact that that's a very difficult timing. We're now working on another research actually about accelerators, incubators, and alternative business support models and financing support models. There is still a number of investors who are interested in investing in the businesses, and actually reaching out to incubators and accelerators could be a very good way of getting the insight on those alternative finance solutions available. I don't know if that answered to the question.
Yeah, I'm sure Farhan would be able to comment on your response. And there's another listener who has commented that SMEs with lower fixed costs sustained during this pandemic for a longer period of time. So how would you, what would be your comments be on that, Alexandra?
So the SMEs, could you repeat it once again, Ali, please?
Yeah, so he's saying that, just to share his experience, SMEs with lower fixed costs sustained during this pandemic for a longer period of time.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that's, of course, it's like, because most of the operations stopped, and the lower the costs are, the more the probability of survival. And but I think that was also one of the areas where the S&Ps actually, and it's good that we have some of the practitioners joining us, they can confirm, where they were working on the cost reductions and on just seeing what's the priority and setting up what the priority and which costs needs to be maintained and which are just unnecessary ones. So it's, I absolutely agree that was also the case in many of the small businesses who I had a chance to talk to. But I think it's better to also address that question to some of the practitioners, to someone who is from the sector and who could comment on that as well. I see that Fahim is there, and he will definitely have his view on that as well.
Yeah, so Fatma has also joined, and we are just waiting for Hashim Saab. I think in the meantime, I would like to give some brief introductions of our panelists today, and then as soon as Hashim Saab joins, we can kick off the panel discussion. So we have with us Mr. Fahim Piracha. He has 20 years of experience across the globe in areas of governance, strategy, risk advisory, and operational excellence. Prior to starting his own consultancy back in 2013, he had the opportunity to be part of world-class organizations, namely PwC, BHP, and Telenor. Secondly, we have Ms. Fatma Saad with us, who is the Regional Director and is the integral member of the top leadership at Abacus Consulting, which is a leading international professional services firm offering cutting-edge technology, outsourcing, and consulting solutions to clients across the 3 continents. Her portfolio includes leading the human capital solutions business and internally the corporate HR and PMO functions. She is also CEO of Abacus ELS, a subsidiary of Abacus Consulting, offering HR outsourcing solutions and responsible for strategically managing the alliance partnership with Merck, a leading global HR consultancy firm. And lastly, we have Mr. Hashim Raza, who is a graduate in mechanical engineering from the University of Engineering and Technology in Lahore. He has diverse experience of about 27 years in development sector in general and the SME development, particularly in various countries, including Pakistan, USA, Qatar, Bangladesh, Thailand, Turkey, UAE, and Mozambique. And in order to moderate the session, we have our very Mr. Arif Masood Mirza, who is the regional head of policy, MISA. So over to you, Arif.
Thank you, Ali. Just want to welcome Fatma and Fahim to the conversation. Hi, Fatma, how are you?
Very well, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Fahim, Assalamu alaikum, how are you? Right, you're just on mute at the moment, Fahim. We'll just do a sound check. Can you check your mute button? Hi, Fahim, can you hear?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Arif, for having me here.
Great. Hello, Hashim, Assalamu alaikum, how are you?
Ji, walaikum salam, I'm fine. I hope everybody is well and I hope I'm on time.
Thank you very much for joining us. So we've just, thank you. So we just had a presentation from Farhan Zafar from SMEDA, and he shared the findings of the SMEDA survey and the key messages. And we also had a similar presentation from my colleague Alex, who presented ACCA's global findings on how the COVID-19 crisis has been impacting SMEs. But I think this part of the conversation, let's keep it very much open. Let's keep it, fairly liberal and non-linear. Let's not be confined to COVID. Let's try and, as the title suggests, rebuilding Pakistan's SMEs for long-term prosperity and jobs, because that's what we all want. We want to see Pakistan prosper. We want to see business men and women prosper, and we want to see their families prosper as well. And so let's dive right in and start off with you, Hashim, in the sense, my initial question is, there are so many sort of roadblocks in front of SMEs. And one of the biggest roadblocks, which we all, I think, experience, is the lack of documentation. So there are many, many SMEs which are not documented, and therefore they cannot take advantage of the various reliefs being offered by the government. How do we, as a macro sort of step, how do we encourage SMEs to register themselves, to document themselves, and become part of the formal economy? It's a big question, but let's start off with that.
Thank you very much. It's a question that I, as CEO SMEDA, and SMEDA itself for the past 20 years have sort of struggled with. But given the wisdom, hopefully the wisdom of the hindsight, we are much more clearer now than what we used to be. The point being that in Pakistan, this drive of bringing the informal sector into the formal sector has been driven primarily through administrative measures in the past. If we recall, there has been a drive somewhere in the early 2000s by the then government, and subsequently, and prior to that also, to administratively drive the process of making sure that the informal or the undocumented economy becomes otherwise. I'm sure you are all aware, but just to reiterate the quantum of this problem, that our initial assessment suggests that something as high as 90% plus of the total economy is undocumented for the moment, in one way or the other. Now, and these past measures of the government, of the policymakers that I shared with you, have predominantly been failures, in the sense that even right now we have very few numbers of the total private sector being part of the formal economy, either as taxpayers or otherwise in terms of registered businesses. We believe that this has to be now driven on merit, which means that currently the problem seems to be that the advantages of being part of the formal economy for an SME seems to be lesser than the disadvantages of being in the undocumented economy. And now, just to elaborate on this, for example, you've mentioned in the working paper that I've received that they were not able to receive the concessional government financing as part of the COVID relief package just because they were not part of the formal economy. But they still chose to do it, and the reason being that the cost that they think they incur, and it is also a perception issue, more of a factual issue, that the cost they think they incur in terms of being part of the formal economy seems to them a little bit higher. Now, in terms of the way forward, I think it is probably a fundamental issue of Pakistan economy, and it is really an issue of that magnitude. And if somehow collectively we can understand how to address it, it probably is going to help not just the government and its economy, but the SME sector as well. Now, and just to add to the debate, we always talk of access to finance as one of the issues faced by SMEs, but one of the surveys that SMEDA conducted back in 2010 and 11, if I'm correct, suggested that it is also an issue of demand, which means that somehow the formal modes of financing doesn't seem to be the preferred mode for a large number of our private sector enterprises. Now, what does it suggest? What it suggests is that a number of things needs to be done concurrently. Number one, that the cost of being part of the formal economy, both in terms of tangible cost and the intangible cost. For example, I can share with you, there has been a strong debate in the government of the kind of intimidation and sort of cost that an SME has to suffer being part of the tax network. The cost that they have to suffer from the inspection regimes of the provincial governments, whether it is social security or labor related or otherwise, and that has to be lowered. So what I'm trying to say is that the government needs to first be able to rationalize both the tangible and the intangible compliance costs that the SME incur, and make sure it is those measures are propagated to the enterprises, so they do understand that that the new inspection or the business registration or documented economy regime is much more different. And as far as SMEDA is concerned, from the as part of our SME policy of 2020, this is exactly what we are proposing. And number two is that that together with it, the incentives that they can receive would have to be targeted as well as marketed to the enterprises as well. So accordingly, as I said, on the same lines, we are ensuring that any enterprise which is declared by the government or small and medium enterprise is actually have access to a simplified compliance regime, a simplified registration, fiscal, and an incentivized monetary regime of the government. Now, these two together, now it is much more easier for me. In fact, it seems like an easier thing to do the way I'm proposing it, but believe me, it is the issue, and it is the most difficult thing to do, because it will involve not just a reforms process in the Federal Board of Revenues, it will also involve changing of laws and regulations. It will also involve getting away with some of the laws that have been done. And just to share with you, just recently I was in a meeting chaired by the Prime Minister, and our ex-Governor State Bank shared that the inspection regime of the provincial government, social security, and all the rest were at time replaced with the self-declaration of the small and medium enterprises, which was accepted as the sort of their final compliance certificate, rather than an inspector going there. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a long process, I know, but I am delighted to share with you that the government is working on it. We are working on it from an SME perspective, and at least we'll get the ball rolling. And hopefully within few years' time it will be. It will be sort of. So I think these together, lowering the cost of registration, being part of the document economy, increasing the incentives of being part of the document economy, a proper marketing of these two to the SMEs, and then having a set of sort of support networks like the ACCA to be able to do that is the way forward.
Great, thank you, Hashim, for that. And I just want to say, let's keep this very much a flexible discussion. So do jump in whenever you have a compelling point to make. So let's not stick to a panel agenda. Just dive in whenever you want to. Fatma, let me ask you, and then I'll turn to Fahim as well. You've just heard Hashim talk about the benefits versus the non-benefits. It's easier to remain outside of the net rather than get into the net of FBRs, etc. You work a lot with SMEs, providing services to enhance their capabilities and enhance their performances. Just sum up, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing SMEs at the moment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for the opportunity. It's wonderful to see all of you, especially Hashim, after so many years. So it's great to reconnect.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm sorry. I the screen is a little farther away from me.
Yes. So it's
great to see you, and my regards to your father.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you for the introduction as well. If I can just take a slightly different global viewing on SMEs, if I have that flexibility.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So what, I was going through, when I got this invitation, I was going through some reports, including OECD, and there was some very interesting research. I'm sorry to have missed the earlier presentation because of my prior commitments, but I'm sure maybe it resonates very closely to what was presented based on ACCA publications as well. And they talked about, very specifically, I'm sort of framing it around the COVID situation, rather than a much broader aspect, because right now we are still going through that crisis. We're still trying to grapple in terms of business continuity, in terms of getting the economy back on track, and also ensuring sustainability as well. So it was a very interesting observation or assessment that they had put forth. They said it's all about supply and demand, as is economics. And they talked about what has really impacted, during the COVID crisis. Well, I won't call it post-COVID, because we're still facing it, and I feel it in my personal opinion, we will feel the repercussions into 2021 as well. So on one side, you have the supply, where you have organizations being hit from health, from mobility restrictions, from shortages in terms of raw material and supply chain, especially if they're dependent on other countries or other regions to procure the raw materials that they require to build their inventory and to build their products. And the other aspect is obviously the demand side, where the consumer purchasing power and the consumer's ability to purchase has decreased. That there are many reasons for that, of course, including some loss in jobs across the world and some in Pakistan as well. You also talk about liquidity shortages, both from a consumer perspective and a SME perspective. And there's also this continuous fear of contracting the COVID as well. And that is making us risk averse as individuals, as businesses, perhaps. Of course, there is the conversation around which industries have been hit the hardest. There is a spectrum, as we all are aware. So you have the hospitality and the tourism industry and airline industry on one end of the spectrum. And then you have the other firms like technology-enabled organizations or technology services and others which have transited onto that platform, faring slightly better or much better, even the FMCGs, retail, etc. But interestingly enough, they talked about an aspect of, while all organizations, whether they're large companies or small and medium, were still struggling to come out of this particular crisis, it impacts the SMEs much more gravely because of their capacity to have access to capital, their bandwidth to absorb the losses as well. They may not have a very deep pockets, and the resilience which they might be able to bounce back as well. There's also the aspect of access to labor on a continuous basis. And the third element is how fast they can transit into a technology-enabled environment. That requires investment. That requires certain processes to be re-engineered, so they can take a certain part of their supply chain, whether it's on the production side or whether it is from the customer delivery side, and invest in that and move into technology-enabled digital solutions, which will give them access to the customer. So these are, I feel, that the main challenges now that are facing the SMEs. Of course, coupled with that is the structural framework that is there right now from a governance standpoint, and also accessibility to capital. Now, Hashim did talk about the initiatives that the government has undertaken. Yes, a lot of organizations did avail this opportunity where there was the relief packages that were extended, and these are commendable. But he's also right in saying that the unorganized sector and undocumented sector fares worse off in this particular situation. There is, I believe, always an opportunity in every crisis. there is an opportunity to enable these SMEs to document without fear of any repercussions or any penalties as well. But there is also a need to have access to capital to invest in developing, not only developing new infrastructures, I feel, and new, especially from a digital perspective, but also use that to enable business continuity from a liquidity perspective. The third element is the workers' capacity to continuously be available. And some of the thoughts that are coming out, and some organizations have already gone into innovative solutions, is maybe permanent contracts is not the solution. Maybe you can actually look at not only remote working. By the way, remote working also requires a certain investment. And again, SMEs are not very quick to transit onto that, either through the channels of access to good technology solutions or the ability to invest in that. But it's also the skill set that is required for the workers in order to upgrade their ability and their capacity to develop an acumen towards how do we work on a digital platform, with digitalized tools from a marketing perspective, to be greater access to the customer, and also re-engineering the supply chain and the processes that exist. So I feel in a nutshell, the challenges that really face post-COVID is how, one, the liquidity, two, our cash flows, enabling them to sustain their growth beyond this crisis. Three, is it also allowing them to make structural changes which will enable them to stay relevant beyond this crisis, which means digitalization as well as the capacity of the workers. And I believe these become the core priorities for us to enable the SMEs. Unfortunately, we will see the startups and SMEs taking a big hit, some of them wrapping up or filing for bankruptcy. That will happen. These are the fallouts of economic recession or a global crisis that we are undergoing right now. But these are the top three that come to my mind because remote working is the way of the world right now, and it will continue. And the quicker these SMEs transit onto that particular platform, the sustainability is ensured.
Yeah, thanks, Fatma. Fahim, Fatma's illustrated, the sort of forces at work that can impact SMEs. Us accountants like to think of themselves as a business partner. You are, heading up a consultancy hyphen and providing such services to a lot of SMEs. And we heard from Alex saying that, a finance professional is like a trusted advisor. How do you see your role as a professional accountant providing that trusted advice? How do you see your role in supporting SMEs, helping them to sustain their operations, and and adding long-term value? So just touch upon those things, and then we'll circle back to Hashim and get SMEDA's point of view on professional accountants as well.
Yes. Thank you very much, Arif, for the question. If I may just give a couple of points in relation to the previous discussion as to the registration of organizations and how we can get this thing done. I will just take a couple of minutes and then I'll come back to your question if you're allowed, right?
Please.
So we see that registration of companies or organizations, we relate it with the tax, right? So we need to see our taxation policy as whether it is well aligned with the organization's objectives or not. So there are 2 to 3 things which I would like to mention. One thing is that whenever people are giving something, they want to see transparency and visibility of that amount being given, be it a tax, right? So what I would like to see is that a governance system where local companies in a locality can have a visibility as to what has been done with the taxpayers' money, right? So a system where when the tax is collected, a portion of that tax is allocated to that particular locality or city, and we as a taxpayer, as an individual or as an organization, can see that where that amount is being spent. So this is one. Second thing is that the taxation policy has to be a business enabler, right? What it means is that the people who are doing business must, I mean, the taxation policy should be prone to them rather than those who are hoarding the, I mean, money, or be it real estate or whatever you may call it. But say, for instance, a person who is doing the transactions is being impacted obviously by sales tax, income tax, everything. So those taxation rates need to be lowered, and we need to look at imposing or implementing a system where the amount that is being saved, or you can make all it coded, that is being taxed at a higher rate, and transactions are being taxed at a lower rate. So just as to encourage the business, and then it would also help people to come into that net. So these were the 2 points. Now I'll quickly, I mean, now to your specific question as to what is the role of, I mean, say business advisors or finance professionals for SMEs. One thing is the, I mean, in nutshell, I would say developing an organization. So this is the key role, right? And the yardstick which I feel, I mean, when I talk to the owners of the organization, the yardstick is that can that organization work without the owner being involved in that organization for say a couple of days or a week? Can that organization continue to work or not? So that means that organization is being developed. And how? Obviously it is in relation to the processes, it is in relation to the systems, it is in relation to the development of people, right? So that system needs to be in place where the organization is developed, it can sustain, and it can go along for, I mean, a number of years. This is one. Second thing is that when we, in relation to SMEs, they think that documentation or the, I mean, documentation or maintaining your books is required only for the purposes of taxation, right? So this mindset needs to be changed by professionals. It is for their ease. It is for them to have a comfortable sleep that what is being happening with the business, where do they stand at this point of time, and how should they move forward. So that mindset needs to be changed, that where, I mean, whenever we are documenting only for the purposes of tax. It is for your own well-being. So this is point number 2. And the third is when we talk about SMEs, so I mean, depending upon the size of the organization, but generally they would have sort of a bookkeeper in his or her premises, right? So then the role comes where you, as a, you may call it as like Alexandra was mentioning, the virtual CFO role, where you can come in, analyze the business, analyze the performance, and give your input for the growth of the organization. So I think these are some of the dimensions where we have to play a role. Our own mindset needs to be changed, and we also need to change the mindset of the organizations as well from that perspective.
Fahim, that's a very interesting point, and I want to bring in Hashim there, because when Hashim and I met, you know, we talked about how we can encourage more and more young professional accountants to play a role within SMEs. And this concept of a virtual CFO, you know, providing services to SMEs and perhaps helping them in that hand-holding towards registering for taxation. Hashim, when we met, you talked about moving SME finance functions to an ERP system. You know, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what are the benefits in moving SMEs to sort of adopt an ERP system, and what role do you envisage that you can see professional accountants playing within that sort of evolution?
Thank you. Before I do that, I would like, you know, just to sort of comment on what Fatma and you know, our colleague has shared. Number one,
Yes,
yes, we do Fatma was absolutely correct in pointing that this is an opportunity as well. For example, we can now see the importance of internal organization systems, management, HR and financial. There has been a greater reliance on technology in terms of remote working and be able to manage your business remotely, and also in terms of business continuity, and also the need for an SME to be able to access formal ways of financing for keeping themselves afloat. And we have tried partially at least to be able to capitalize on this and see, for example, some of the incentives that in the COVID or the post-COVID era that we are now proposing for the government to offer to the SMEs will be in some ways related to their inclusion into the formal economy. So there will be a strong enough carrot for them to see, if not change their mind immediately, then at least to be able to do it in the future. And yes, we have seen ourselves also that the companies who've had benefited from the investments into their financial management or ERP or other systems have been able to benefit greatly. The comments made on the transparency and the return on or the potential benefits of being part of a tax system or paying your taxes, absolutely correct. But our research suggests that the real cost that an enterprise incurs is not so much financial, it is otherwise. It is really the harassment. It is really the intrusion of the government or the ability for the government to intrude into an SME business and then leading into all sorts of undocumented cost of bribery or sorts of costs. When it comes to the declared regulatory cost of either taxation or otherwise, and if you see the negotiations between the government and otherwise, the SME trade sector, for example, they're all okay to work with a presumptive regime, which allows a little discretion for the government to be able to intrude into a business, as long as the government can and that the government can sort of compromise on their discretionary powers or discretionary powers of the inspectors or of the tax authorities and all that. But there is a reason that has not happened. There is a realization of that. I can tell you very frankly that in terms of the policymakers that I interact with, this is strongly real. I think it is more of a matter of now how to do it. There have been efforts in terms of reforming our FBR. There have been efforts in terms of reforming our provincial authorities who interact with the registrar of firms and our social security and blah blah blah. But they have been marginally successful. But within those, other than rolling out a robust sort of integrated reform process, which needs to happen and which I can share with you at least is beginning to happen, there are few things that can be sort of looked upon as can be done relatively quickly. And I'll give you one example. We are proposing now to the government that the startup enterprises for a certain period of size, certain periods of time, and up to a certain revenue level should actually be declared tax-free. The point is that the government on one hand is not really getting any revenues out of them. So they are losing a dollar they don't have. And on the other hand, you are encouraging new enterprise creation, which is, I think, is absolutely essential for our economy. Also, for example, in terms of what the local, I'm just sharing examples because this doesn't allow detailed discussions. But for example, the local realization of where their tax dollar has been spent, as well as the dispute resolution part of it. We've been looking at the idea where they are a collective, so either sectoral or cluster based compliance support that are provided to a number of organizations working together. So they can be part of an industrial state, they can be part of a certain cluster, and they exercising more sort of leverage over the government to see that we have provided this text to the government and we would like to see what benefits we are getting out of it. So these are just some of the things that can be done and have been done. But let me be very frank about this also. At the end of the day, irrespective of how utopian I and you can think, it is all going to be driven by a business argument. The business is driven by money. So if they eventually feel that the argument in favor of being a formal economy is far superior and compelling than the argument of remaining themselves, keeping themselves in the informal economy, only then the real change will happen. And that is really a long drawn process, but we have to start working on this, sort of immediately. Now, coming to the specific question that have been asked now, before I answer that directly, let me share with you sort of, I've been on the other side of the table in terms of a service provider to an SME, and I've worked in the firm which is jointly owned by Fatma for a long time. In fact, this is where I'm very proud to say I started my career. Now I'm for a short period at least, I'm on the other side of the table, and see, I can tell you that from a government's perspective, as well as largely from an SME perspective, and I'll be very frank about this, there has been a very severe lack of good service providers which caters to the SME sector. Well, there are players here and there, but again, there is a commercial argument that drives it, that this particular market segment doesn't seem as profitable for large service providers, whether accountants or financial services or HR or marketing or ERPs or otherwise. And I buy that. What we are trying to do is to make sure that that financial argument tilts a little bit in favor of a functioning market, a functioning service market for an SME. And within this, as I said, what we are willing to do, at least to begin with, is to ensure that the basic investments are taken care for by the government, to make sure that over a period of time at least, this market matures as a commercial market. For example, we would like more accountants, we would like more ERP solution providers to be able to service, and initially for the period, because again, as I said, it is both a demand as well as it is both a supply as well as a demand side issue. So eventually, whenever a situation like this arises, somebody has to intervene to make the transaction profitable, a win-win situation for everyone. And this is what we are trying to do. And I will be very happy to see, that the service providers, seize that opportunity, because I can share that at least, our proposal are in the final stage of being accepted by the government, and if I'm sure that we will make that announcement soon. And once that happens, we expecting a large exponential growth in terms of the service market for the small and medium enterprises, initially supported by the government, but that eventually functioning on its own. And we would like to see these service providers, either on an individual level or a collective level, to be able to make those investments. Finally, I think within this, and specifically from the perspective of ACCA, the financial management and planning and accounting and maintenance services, by far, I think the only other contender probably is a small scale or a SME suited ERP solution. By far exceeds all the other services that are really needed for both the enterprises and from a policymaker perspective. And I'll tell you why, because this is really the key for addressing issues like lessening the dependability on a central key figure of the organization, lessening the dependability on informal ways of managing the organization, making sure that over a period of time this corporatization and the occurs, and then ensuring that the government, the incentives, either incentive or the access to finance and other are accessible by the SME. Number two probably is really the technology part of it and the accounting solution. We've started this discussion initially in the context of COVID-19, but we are now carrying on this discussion to ensure that initially at least we support the process through which a certain number of SMEs all across our geography are able to access or implement an ERP solution. Again, as I said, initially with this some sort of an intervention of the government, but then eventually, unless until the market picks up, unless until the accountants see a benefit in terms of providing services to SMEs, either on a collective or otherwise basis, unless the ERP solution provider sees the opportunity to be, unless the bank sees an opportunity, this will not be sustainable. And this is what we are trying to do, and hopefully, but as I say, to be honest, and I'm not saying this just because I'm sitting with ACCA or because I see a director of one of the largest consulting firms in Pakistan on the screen. I say it generally that eventually I think there is a market that can be tapped, and I think eventually there is currently a very big gap that needs to be fulfilled. And hopefully, if we fulfill this, government can intervene, the private sector can intervene, the SMEs, as long as they see the benefit, will change eventually. It will not be for in a year's or a few months' time, but I think that is the commercial argument that will lead to what has been said is the change of the mindset. They will have to see the benefits to be able to change their mindset. Thank you.
Thanks, Hashim. You know, it's about changing the mindsets and making it very visible and tangible to SME owners as to the benefits of some of the things that you said. You know, Fahim and Fatma, you know, just jump in terms of, you know, where you see, you know, the reforms that need to take place. I mean, for me, you know, Fahim talks about taxation. You know, I think the taxation rates, whether it's the GST or whether it's direct taxes, they're just far too high. You know, they should be staggered from 5% upwards rather than, you know, at 17%. But you know, considering the mindset of the government and the need for balancing the budgets and the need to raise more taxes, how can we ever lower taxes on SMEs? We surely can't.
So I just have a point, unless Fahim, you want to go first, but you did raise very good points on the tax structure. But I would like to also highlight that what Hashim was mentioning, that's heartening to know that there are positive actions that are taking place. However, when you look at a sector, you know, it has to be a long-term commitment. And that's what I think we're all saying over here. If you've also raised that point, that it has to be sustainable. You build a vision which has to enable a certain sector and make it incentivize them in such a way that you cover for them for a certain number of years. If startups and small and medium-sized enterprises have to be hit by a very large tax component, whether it's minimum tax or GST, you might as well not go into business. As a business owner, you will say, fine, I've got this great idea, but it cannot be translated into a profitable, viable business plan. And I think that is something that has hit many businesses over the last few years. So it's about rethinking the tax structure model to enable the SMEs, even the micro entrepreneurs, so they become productive contributors to the economy. If we look at our population, 220 million people, 60% under the age of 30. And I'm not saying only those who are under the age of 30 are setting up new businesses. That's across all age brackets. And on the other side, you have more established large multinationals as well as national organizations. It's also about the capacity to absorb the workforce and create jobs. So there is a win-win situation if we enable the SME sector. Not only are they creating jobs, but they're also bringing great ideas because they're much more flexible than the large, more established organization. If cover is provided more from also from a tax relief perspective, as well as enabling them from an investment for the future. Again, it's not just about what is relevant today. We have to build for the future as well and make sure that they're sustainable beyond 10, 15 years. And in an age of technology, in an age of where reskilling is a priority for our human capital, whether it is in Pakistan or anywhere else, that is something which is fundamental, and all organizations face that. And last thing is the governance around that. So it's not something which should be good to have. I believe this should be one of the national priorities, which should drive one of the main components of the economic engines of this country. And tax governance, the structural changes and the collaboration between the private sector and the government entities becomes very key. That's my point of view on this.
Thanks, Fatma. Fahim, talk a little bit about the virtual CFO and whether we can even have virtual governance for SMEs. How would that work?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, when we talk about virtual CFO, so it has to be a broader role. I mean, obviously, we cannot have for an SME. I mean, who is just hiring an accountant. So there has to be a person who is actually a business advisor, CFO, and from governance perspective. So I'll just share you a couple of examples. It's not only that the professional service providers or organizations like SMEDA, only they encourage SMEs to follow that route. SMEs also are realizing the fact that they have to have things in order. I mean, one of the examples which I can share is a renowned fashion brand, a good brand. So but when I talked to the owner, I said that you have developed a brand, but you haven't developed an organization over the years. And the result is that, he is having a sleepless nights. He's not knowing where the money is coming from and where the money is going. So that system and process in place, and the first step is to developing that platform for an organization where the owner can spend time on the growth of the business rather than managing operations on a day-to-day basis, right? So developing that platform, and then be a right hand of that owner on a continuous basis in relation to the issues in relation to process. Whenever you are launching a new product or doing something different, so what has to be the process in place for that purposes, right? And for instance, as a virtual CFO, you can be on a call anytime, but say a monthly meeting where the financials are taken into account overall, from control perspective, how the things are going along. These things need to be taken care of for the benefit of the, and as Hashim rightly mentioned, that the benefits need to outweigh whatever the cost is. So from professional service providers perspective as well, you have to convince them obviously that there are the benefits of developing an organization and then spending time on your growth rather than managing things on a day-to-day basis.
But Hashim, you mentioned, that a lot of SME owners are targets of harassment and bullying by the authorities. Yep. Either the taxation authorities are harassing SME owners, or licensing authorities, or maybe those authorities that want an NOC or any type of, certifications that they need, licenses, certifications, NOCs. All these institutions may be harassing the SME owner. Yep. The CFO or the virtual CFO cannot come in and stop the harassment. What do we need to stop harassment?
Yeah,
do
frankly,
we need some special tribunals? What?
Right. Yeah. First of all, what the SME policy, which is almost at the final stages of being approved by the government, does talk of carving out a specific regulatory, fiscal, and monetary space for small and medium enterprises as part of the overall regulatory space of the government, which would mean that as a principle, a regulation should affect SME differently than it affects larger enterprises. And that has been because at the end of the day, the way I understand from my last 20 years of experience of working in this, it is really about offsetting the doing the cost of business as an SME as otherwise, of offsetting that difference in the cost of production to ensure that there is a larger number of enterprises being created and developed in the small and medium enterprise sector. And it indirectly gives the benefit to the government by providing employment and a low-cost employment creation for the youth that Fatma mentioned about. Now, so that's one pillar. The other thing that we need to do is really a regulatory simplification. So again, one of the pillars of the policy that we are proposing is that there is going to be a mapping of all the regulatory compliance that an enterprise has to go through. And then what we are implementing, what is now a sort of a trademark process all over the world, is what they call regulatory gulleting, which means there are laws now which have become irrelevant of the times that we live in, and those can be just simply done away with. And then there are other laws which would require simplification. And those, again, as Fatma has mentioned, it's a long run process. But once we have done the mapping exercise, we have identified, then the process of the regulatory simplification will actually roll on. But of course, it's predominantly a provincial subject, so we will be working with the provincial governments to be able to do that. Well, I'm saying all of this very easily, but I am very absolutely cognizant that this is a very hard nut to crack, and it will take a lot of years to actually crack. But at least it'll be good to get the process rolling. The number three, the number third. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to know, do the SME owners know the remedies, the legal remedies available to them when they're faced with challenges from these institutions in terms of, the intermediaries who come to them either for bribes or for commissions? Do SME owners know the legal remedies available to them?
Right. I think predominantly no. You're absolutely right in pointing out that predominantly people are not aware of the legal remedies available or to be able to pursue those. And this is the time of whenever something like this happens, they enter into that panic mode, and then eventually somebody benefits. So no, I think predominantly no. And there are not too many either. Although there are some remedies that are irrespective of the size of the enterprises. But in terms of either an alternate dispute resolution mechanism or in terms of a specific platforms which are dedicated to small and medium enterprises to be able to avail those remedies, unfortunately those are not available as much as they should have. And whatever little that there is, the SMEs are usually in our experience are not aware. The number three thing which at times get missed is what we call collectivism. You see, for a larger enterprises anywhere in the world, and more so in Pakistan, it is easier for them to invest, to understand the legal remedies available, or to be able to exercise their right to avail those remedies, or to be able to sort of influence a certain policy or a decision or a certain organization of the government which is regulating them. But that becomes much more difficult for a SME because of the sheer nature of their size and their financial outlay. Now, that issue in itself at times is also resolved by collectivism, which means that you have functioning SME associations at whatever level you can call them, at a chamber level or at a trade association level, or even at a more of a cluster level, which, because of their collective bargaining power, provides that either shield to the SME or provides them the information that you just talked about. I've been, for example, just last week we were into a discussion with one of the government, and they said that Italy, which is probably the closest European example who marched upon an SME development path, probably we are talking of about 4 to 5 decades back, started off by establishing these associations of those producers of leather, footwear and fashion wear and all those. And those collective associations eventually, 1, provided the information, 2, provided the platform, 3, sort of addressed the cost of service delivery to SMEs because they were doing it on a collective basis, and 4, were able to offset the advantages of size for a particular enterprise. So you're correct in pointing that those sort of remedies, the awareness of those remedies, the presence of those remedies, and then the delivery of those mechanisms to SMEs, there needs to be work done on sort of all these fronts.
Fahim and Fatma, what is your view on this? I mean, we have a lot of associations and chambers across the country. There are so many, you know, but the only time they seem to come alive is when the budgets are about to be released, you know,
Budgets
and
or
then they
elections.
start sort of, or elections, yeah. So, you know, what's going on? Why can't we sort of improve their performance?
I feel that there is change underway, but one of the fundamental premises, if you look at it from an organizational perspective, the private sector, you focus on the customer experience. You talk about the customer at the center of how your value chain is designed. And I believe then one works backwards. Unfortunately, there seems to be a bit more, there's a sluggishness or a bureaucracy that is involved in these particular associations. For then there are various reasons for that. It's also about how important is this factor that you streamline it to enable. Aapka jo question tha, Arif, ke, is there a platform for logging in any harassment and how to deal with it? It doesn't exist because I feel that the facilitation mode is not really centered around the customer, perhaps. Maybe, I mean, what Hashim has said, there are changes underway, but it is taking a bit of time and it just needs to be expedited. So I feel that the more you have a customer approach, centric approach towards it, what does the customer need? Specifically, what do these SMEs need in terms of awareness, orientation, facilitation? Do you need to go to the regulatory body? Do you need to go to the trade association? And then it's not about the bureaucracy, it's about enabling that particular organization or that owner, that entrepreneur, to enable their business. It's a mindset shift towards what is the purpose of these trade associations and the chambers to, you know, really contribute to the economic equation. I feel that that just needs to be redesigned. That's just my point of view.
Fahim?
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, I would say, I mean, as slightly mentioned previously as well, that our way of, the way of functioning of government has to be at a local level. And when we talk about the local governance, I mean, I would like to see, say, a person responsible for the city, say a mayor or whoever he is, he has to be the responsible for the GDP of that city, right? And that complete governance mechanism has to be put in place. And then all the things which we are talking about in relation to the tax, resolutions or everything, and how to support SMEs. So, I mean, we need to bring it down to the local level where we collectively, under that governance mechanism, see as to how to take that a particular city up the curve. And as you were mentioning about the chamber, I mean, yes, recently there were elections and people, I mean, came to me, and yes, we had a conversation on the similar topics as to what this chamber does. So my perspective that was that the chamber needs to be a body that can give a certain vision on the economics of that particular city, right? As to what needs to be done, where we need to move on, and that policy making, and that, as I'm mentioning, has to come under that local governance mechanism. And many of the things, from my perspective, can be taken care of.
And I just want to add to what Fahim has said, RFMIMA, it's actually slightly less challenging now in the age of digitalization and technology. Setup, unhone baat ki about a virtual CFO, having platforms which are virtual, and that is the norm now. I mean, we're having a virtual session right now, and that's going to continue. Actually, having those platforms, having that portal in creating awareness and guiding SMEs, and also a go-to place, it's far easier at this point in time. Of course, the governance mechanism and the structural changes have to ensue as well. So everything, the value chain has to be streamlined and integrated, no doubt about it. But I really believe that if we were to capitalize on this amazing opportunity, despite the unfortunate crisis of the COVID, we can really, expedite the entire process of the change that is required to enable the SMEs in our country.
Yeah, we were speaking to Hashim in his office about how to sort of integrate, the ACCA members into sort of supporting SME sort of sustainability. We've got members working in different sectors, and I think it's best that we understand the reform agenda that Hashim is currently working on with SMEDA and the Ministry of Industry and Planning, to really understand where professional finance people can fit in terms of not adding to the cost of SMEs, because that's another area. If bringing a professional on board is going to add to the cost, then they need to see the benefits. But I think what we're going to do is really explore with SMEDA on how the accounting ecosystem can benefit the SME sector as well. I think that has to be explored. I think a lot of the harassment and the bullying that we've talked about from the institutions, I think accountants have to know the remedies. You can't burden the SME owner with everything. I think professional accountants have to rise to the challenge and have to be side by side with the SME owner. They have to take on that burden. And I think, some way we need to develop that sort of collaboration between SME owners and sort of qualified accountants as well.
Can I just make a suggestion? Hashim, because this is a great work and input that is already started, and I know you're involved in talks at the highest level as well. But Arif also just gave me a great idea. It's about, going through that experience. If people who are delivering the service go through that process, just go through that process and see, how does your customer, the SME, the entrepreneur, what is that experience that they go through when they have to register their business, when they want to reach out for some enablement, some facilitation from a tax perspective, from a financial perspective, any other advice. And if we just sort of go through that experience, you see where the roadblocks are, where the frustrations are, where the challenges are. That gives a lot of insight into where things need to be corrected. There are some things which are very good, but there could be huge gaps, especially of this new, what I call, what everyone calls the digital natives, this new generation, the millennials. They will be extremely frustrated, and we lose out to very good ideas, and perhaps they'll leave the country and get investment from somewhere else. So there is great opportunity, but we have to feel their pain in order to understand how do we facilitate them.
If I can just quickly add that, Arif sir, what you mentioned in terms of, and let me reiterate what I've said before.
Yeah.
That from government's perspective, head of an SME development agency. Just let me give you an example from this afternoon. We were having this discussion with the State Bank to be able to increase their access to finance, SMEs access to finance, and one of the key challenges that the banks had put forward is that we cannot assess their cash flows. Their accounts are not documented. We do not have access to how their business model works. We do not know how to assess their capacity to be able to pay back. Now, we are looking at, for example, just to sort of financially, sort of outlay this proposition, our current financing to SMEs stands at something like 450 billion rupees a year, rupees of the private sector credit. We estimate it to be anywhere close to 4 times of this size. So we are talking of something close to 1600 billion rupees. Now, if that happens for one reason or through a miracle, that creates a lot of business proposition, which are win-win situation for everyone. That creates value in the economy. Now, for this to happen, of course, there are demand side issues as well, but there are supply side issues as well. And again, to reiterate, there I see a very, very big role of the service providers. Unfortunately, as I've said, and I'll be frank about this on my feedback, yes, I take in stride the feedback on government, which is absolutely well placed. That, and again, for the reason of business proposition, I think that whether these are professional accountants or technology service providers or management consultants or trainers, they will have to look at ways of coming up the delivery mechanism to the small and medium enterprise sector to make sure that it remains a value proposition. For example, either doing it remotely, doing it collectively, working with associations or otherwise, and then focus this as one of the potential markets, because at the end of the day, we are talking of 99% of the total enterprises in Pakistan. The total number of large enterprises in Pakistan is less than 1%. Currently, we estimate the total private sector enterprises to be close to 5.2 million, out of which 99% are SMEs. So there is a value proposition for the service providers as well. I do understand that it may not flourish in the longer term, but I completely agree with what Fatma said. We have to take a medium to longer term approach and sort of do it collectively. And as I said, irrespective of whether I'm part of this forum, otherwise we are supporting this process, and I'll be very keen to work with the panelists that I see here today to take this process forward.
Thank you.
Well, I think the supply of finance professionals is on the rise, simply because we are part of the pipeline. So I do see a lot of young people entering the profession. I do see a lot of skills in terms of fintech as well. So and Fahim employs a lot of young people in his firm as well. So there is that supply side change happening within financial services, which we can sort of explore with SMEDA, and also the fintech model is going to help companies as well, because with fintech you're not going to need as many sort of transactional sort of methodologies. You're just going to rely upon automation. So increasingly I think life is going to become easier. Somebody said the other day that so many events I've been to where they've been quoting Charles Dickens by saying, this is the worst of times and this is the best of times. I've heard that quote so many times now, because that's what COVID is illustrating. That the cost of capital is coming down. People are investing in their capabilities. So it is the best of times, but clearly it's worse as well because of COVID. And I hope, for Pakistan's sake, that the demand, whether it's on the political side, whether it's democracy, I hope the frontier is being pushed further and further into the third, fifth, fourth gear, so that we do advance. I'm conscious of the time. I've kept you all here till 6 o'clock. Ali, I just want to ask, are there any sort of compelling questions that the audience have asked?
Arif, I will have to excuse myself. I already had a call at 6 o'clock, so my apologies that I won't be able to stay for Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Fatma. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Hashim. It was great to connect with both of you. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Khudafis. Ali, are there any questions?
There are a couple of questions, but I think we have already covered them in our comments and questions.
Okay. Alex, if you switch on your camera, can we sort of ask you to join in and sort of also make some remarks after hearing the discussion?
Yes, thank you very much.
We have Alex with us, Hashim. She's the head of small medium practitioners in the UK office. Alexandra, any observations from you?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, and it was extremely interesting to listen to that discussion and to learn more about the context of SMEs in Pakistan and what type of challenges, but also opportunities at the moment the small business sector is facing. And while I would definitely like to echo something that Fatima has suggested, that given that the practitioners and the accountants have all the in-depth information, data about how small businesses work, what are they facing now, I think they should definitely, if there is such an opportunity, be involved in the discussions with the government on the support schemes and in general on the programs that are being built to support the SMEs, because you will be able to get the first-hand information from the ones who are really considered as trusted advisors, who are acting as virtual CFOs. And well, we are seeing a lot of that interaction here in the UK, but also I know across other markets, it's quite a common practice to involve the practitioners, the accountants in the consultation processes, and it's always a very fruitful process. It's just making sure that the real needs and the current situation is being communicated to the government and to the organizations working close to the government to advocate the interests and support the SMEs. Thank you so much for this opportunity. From the professional insights perspective, we're always happy to work together with our members, but also with the organizations who we're closely working with in Pakistan. And well, if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions on how we can support you from the professional insights research perspective, always happy to do so.
So Alex, there was a lot of discussion in the panel about, you know, regulators who harass SME owners, you know, and certainly Pakistan doesn't have a monopoly over bribery and corruption. It's there in Europe as well, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, you know, certainly all these countries face this challenge. In Europe, tell me, how have the SMEs actually coped with such behavior on the part of the regulators?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that in Europe, there is a number of organizations, SME advocacy organizations like federations of small businesses, who are really being instrumental in protecting SMEs against those activities of the governments. And well, of course, in Europe, well, again, depending on the country, in such of the East European countries, it's still an emerging sector. But I think that those federations of small businesses, associations of small businesses, they are often now being part of all the government consultations, and they are being actively involved in the not only in the process, but in a way they are acting as regulators of those rights, and they are advocating the rights of the SMEs. And of course, there are also some very efficient government feedback mechanisms where such behaviors can be reported. And well, as Fatima was mentioning, for example, in the age of digitalization, those mechanisms are even like they're facilitated, and there are hotlines, there are helplines to support the SMEs where those cases can be reported. And nowadays, it's not necessary to call. You can just log the case. And I know that some of the SMEs can be facing some fears to get some repercussions from the local authority representatives who are acting this way. That's why a lot of mechanisms are anonymous, and they can be also addressed by a group of SMEs. They can be used by a group of SMEs to address the concern that they have.
Great, thank you for sharing those final thoughts with us, Alex. And so that just brings me to the end of the discussion. I just want to thank Mr. Hashim Raza, Chief Executive of SMEDA. Sir, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. They were very profound and compelling, and will encourage us to sort of explore some collaborative efforts with you, so that you can take account of the views of the accounting community. Fahim Paracha, Chief Executive of Hyphen Consultancy. Fahim, thank you very much for your thoughts. I think, again, some profound remarks and compelling thoughts from you, and we will certainly rely upon you also as a spokesperson for ACCA as well. Thank you, Fahim. And Alex, thank you so much for joining us from London and from ACCA Professional Insights team. I will follow up with you, Hashim, on the outcomes, and so that we can take this forward with SMEDA. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arif. Thank you very much, Hashim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Khudafis.
Allah Hafiz.